Art History 1, Part 13. This is Chartres Cathedral, and it is a Gothic church. It's one of the first to be a wholly Gothic church, or at least mostly holy. This is the bottom part here of the facade in the west is the original church, the original Romanesque church, and then a later building project produced this tower on the right, and the one on the left is a much later. So you have a blending of all the different styles that had occurred during the Gothic period. Another church that I want to look at is Reims Cathedral near Paris on the east side, and it's much more unified. It's much more a purer example of the Gothic style. It all appears to be one unified style. And as you see, as Gothic went on, emphasis grew on verticality. So when you look at all the elements, the windows, very tall and skinny, repetitions of vertical lines abound everywhere, and much fewer lines that are horizontal. And it is encrusted with ornamental everywhere. The surface area that is not sculpted is very small as compared to Chartres. As you can see, it has lots of blank wall. Only when you get up to here do you get the much later Gothic at Chartres. But what I want to focus on is the jam figures like I had at Chartres, the ones down here. At Chartres, these are the jam figures on the royal portal, and you can see that the figures look like columns, and that it's as if the sculptors were conceiving the figures as part of the architecture. The sculpture is made to look like architectural features, so they are columnar as well as figures. When we look at those same figures in the same position at Reims, this is you see a different style or a different concept where it looks like the figures are presented by the architecture on pedestals for display, so that they're more independent. They look like figures. But even among these, you see differences in the way they are conceived. The two on the right are conceived in one way. They are one style, and these two are different from these two, and they're also different from each other. It appears as though different sculptors involved, which explain why they are different styles. And you can imagine how these building campaigns would have a lot of different sculptors. I mean, when you look at this, the amount of sculpture on this must have been that needed hundreds of people sculpting, and some of them, I guess the best ones, would have their own styles, and they would, when they on an occasion like this on the front door, they could show off their styles. Well, let's look at the first two on the right. It's called the Visitation. It is a scene with two figures, Mary and Elizabeth, part of the gospel story where they meet. Elizabeth is Mary's cousin, and they're both carrying children, Christ here and John the Baptist here. And when they meet, John the Baptist leaps in his mother's womb, signifying that he is near Christ, which is John the Baptist's role in the gospel, is to signify the presence of Christ. But the way they are presented is two fully formed figures. They are leaning slightly, not leaning, but they're tilted, pivoted, such that Mary faces a little bit to the right and Elizabeth faces a little bit to the left, so that they create a pair. And the style of the figures is such that they look like classical figures. They're very much Roman in concept, and the artist must have had access to Roman sculpture. This is a town that used to be a Roman town, and there was probably sculpture around that the artist could see. Now, every artist, as you can see over here, wasn't influenced by those sculptures, because These are a style that's much different. But whoever made this pair must have been wanted to be very faithful to the Roman style, because when you look at it, I mean, you can see that it has a contrapposto pose underneath the drapery. You can see a little knee sticking out. You can see the sway of the figure, especially Mary here, the little sway, and that comes from having an engaged foot and a non-engaged foot over here. This tilt of the body and the sway and it makes it look more alive and relaxed, less like a statue. And Mary has the same sort of pose, but she is individualized, made to look a little different. She has a facial features, of an older woman, as opposed to a younger woman. But even the younger woman looks more like a specific person rather than a classical face. It is the kind of facial features that you would see in Roman portraiture. So there must have been Roman sculpture available to see that were more portrait-like, because there are portraits from Roman times that are like this one. You see, it's also painted. The skin is painted to look more like a skin tone. The way the drapery looks, with all the little crinkles in it, is similar to the kind of treatment of drapery that the Romans used as well, going back to the Greeks and their wet drapery look. You can see that the folds appear naturalistic, in the sense that everything, every fold, every little groove and concavity and convexity that you see looks believable. It looks like it's flowing, it's moving the way you would expect cloth to really move. But here's a neat little thing, is that as to make the pair, in addition to the pivoting one and the other, so as that they sort of lean towards each other or tilt towards each other. There's this, look at this division in the cloth that she has on her. This little diagonal line sort of lines up with this over here, and then this part here lines up with this one over here, so that it's as if there's a sweep here and a sweep here that bring them together as a unified pair. In addition to the leaning this way and the leaning this way. So this is very Roman. When you look at these two, they are also sort of leaning towards each other, a little pivoting towards each other to make a grouping. This is the Annunciation with Gabriel on the left and Mary on the right. But they don't look the same as these two, nor do they look the same as each other. This figure, a little stiff. It doesn't have the contrapposto pose. It has a little foot sticking out here, but there's no indication of a knee poking out, and there's no sway. It's just this looks more, I guess, statuesque compared to this as a living person. It doesn't look that natural. It's the drapery as well is broader and makes a pattern like a heavy hanging down vertical lines, as opposed to this more dynamic thing going on over here. It looks a little less sophisticated than this. Is as if this was maybe a master carver is doing these two, while someone who's less experienced is doing this one. When you look at this one, though, this one doesn't look less experienced than these two. This is just a different style. This style is a style, it has a different proportion than these. This looks naturalistic proportions. This head and this height seem to be naturalistic or classical. This head, with this much smaller head and much skinnier body, seems attenuated, with little delicate features, with this little skinny hand coming out here and daintily holding up this bit of drapery. And the leaning forward head and the little tilt and the little smile on the face. All these things are a kind of a style that we're going to see more of later. This will be like characteristics of the international style. It's much more elegant and precious and delicate. The drapery on it is It's much broader like this one as opposed to these two here, but it makes much more interesting, but not naturalistic movements. It is a little swirl that you get here around here is nice. The contrast between the tightness of this, I guess, a brooch holding these two parts of cloth together, so that the straight lines come out are showing the tautness of it, and the form you can see underneath the drapery there. And this line coming around and gently being held by this little hand, causing these cascades to occur, making a very interesting and with a wide variety of changes of direction and changes of depth, to make a much more dynamic thing. It doesn't have the naturalism that this one has. It is in that it's unnatural, or at least it's not as believable. But it is. It has a kind of nobility to it, like it's a little otherworldly, like the kind of alien world that the nobility live in, where everything is a little mannered and artificial, but still elegant. So that's the Gothic architecture we're looking at from the a little bit later than Chartres, when it's much more developed and much farther along, moving in that direction of verticality and lots of decoration. But as we go into the Gothic period, with even taller windows, more surface area devoted to glass, and less surface area devoted to structure, you get to this chapel called Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. And this is about the limit that you can get to, or that they were able to get to in terms of this style, and the direction that it was headed. That is, to get the most possible glass you can with the least possible structural appearance. Sainte-Chapelle is a little chapel in Paris. It was the royal chapel. It was the one that the king used himself. It was built after King Louis IX acquired the crown of thorns as a relic, and he brought it to the chapel, or had the chapel built around it, so as to the chapel itself would be a kind of reliquary for it. And this is much later in the process. This is in the late 1200s. And the technology that they had developed through all the Gothic churches of making tall skeletal buildings with vast areas of glass had reached the point where they could do something like this. From the outside, you see all the structure, and on the inside, you see lots and lots of glass. It is as pretty as it can possibly be. Every surface is painted and decorated. Everything is as colorful and kaleidoscopic as it could be. The experience of walking into this chapel is such that it doesn't seem real. Visually, the architects have made it such you can't really tell what's going on. It's like you're looking at some sort of special effect, because the structure that you can see, this bit's here, these tall, skinny structural elements, don't seem at all adequate to carry the ceiling. This is what the ceiling looks like, and this is something made of stone, and that there's an attic above this, and there's also a tower above that. So there's the tower up there. So something's got to be holding all this weight. And from the inside, you can't see it. All you see is the colored light and the beautiful specter. I'm sorry. The light coming in. You're just overwhelmed with and dazzled by all this light. One way that this is done, that what we see here, these piers. Well, let's start with a hole shape. The hole shape is essentially a rectangle with an apse on one end. It doesn't have the aisles. If you have aisles on a church, that's going to block some light coming in from the side. So if you're just making a chapel, you don't need the aisles. So you dispense with those. You just have the walls, and you have an apse with just, you can have light coming in from whatever direction it's going to come in, and it can come from all sides. So you're just bathed in it all over the place. But look at this structural elements, the piers. They're made out of a cluster of colonnettes, you say. Each one is painted with a different pattern, which adds to the illusion that they're not real. This is stone, and it's a very heavy and very strong structural element, but you're only seeing a little bit of it. And the little bit that you're seeing is sort of dissolved by having these vertical lines within it. But it is a structural member, and behind this glass, there's a big chunk of stone out here for each one of these that is holding stuff up. So all of that weight is being channeled down to these buttresses on the outside. And they are made as thin as they can be, in this dimension, but also they don't want them to project any more than they have to, because they're that would block light. So the trade-off here is, so as little structure as you can have, and still and that can hold up the roof and still have as much light as you can have. There's also some metal tie rods that are going through this area to keep them from splaying apart with the forces that are being acted upon them. Here again is that cluster of colonnettes. And you can see the way this worked in the other Gothic cathedrals, where the outer one, the one they're projecting most forward, if you follow it up, it goes and it's bearing the weight of the transverse arch. And the next one is a smaller one, is bearing the weight of the diagonal arch, and the next one along is carrying the weight of the arch across the windows. And that way it's, when you look at this, you see this as almost as if it's more stained glass, more decoration, because it's everything is painted with elaborate and confusing colors. And disguising, I should say, disguising the. I think this is a little clearer. No, it's not a little clear. Let's look at this one. The place is as splendid as it can be, in terms of, every conceivable thing has been carved into shapes and painted with color, so that the whole thing becomes a reliquary to hold the relic of the crown of thorns, which is what this was for. And being of all relics, a crown is something that's going to be associated with with royalty, and so it was appropriate for the king to do this. And if you look at all the pictures that are in the stained glass over here, you see many of them have to do with royal things, with the king, and the story of the acquisition of the crown are all told, as well as biblical stories that are relevant. Here's some of that glass. Notice that there are stories here. There's the stories here. There's some figures here, and you can tell by their movements, the way they're standing, their gestures, that something is happening. There's a person seated here, putting a crown on somebody's head. But every available space is covered with patterns, with frequently changing colors everywhere, so that it's dazzling. And even the figures themselves are made up of little pieces of color, so that if you just disregard the story aspect, you're just overwhelmed with pieces of color shining on you from all directions. Even the floor is broken up into lots of patterns and colors everywhere. There's no place for the eye to rest, given the amount of decoration that everything has. There's one work that's on our list that came from this church. It used to be up on the windows. This is it's a scene from the Old Testament with Holofernes crossing the Euphrates. And it's typical in its coloring and its and the way it's drawn. But it's atypical in that it has a little bit of spatial relationship that's interesting. That most of them don't have. Look back to see what typical sort of storytelling is like. It's just flat areas of color. And some of the pieces have drawings on top of the glass, made by putting, once the glass is cut and made into shapes, then they can draw on it with an ink made with, metallic metals dissolved in it. And when those is refired, it can makes these the details of things. So some areas of color are just color, and others have little pictures, little drawings inside them, adding to the realism of the thing within the very limited degree of realism that you can get with chunks of colored glass. But you can see how a scene is made up with just some figures and gestures, and you pretty much have to know the story to tell what's going on. And in the one that we're looking at here, you see an army on horseback, and there's 4 horses, and they are rendered as if the same shape when overlapping one to the next, so as to give you just see one in the front, and then the rest are repeats of that one. You understand that they're moving back into space, even though it's not particularly a convincing illusion. The group of soldiers on the horseback are rendered in just a few bits of color and some details. You can see the ones in the front. You can see a few faces here, and then a bunch of heads back there. So that gives you a shorthand version of an army on horseback. Then you see this one guy here talking with this guy here. Notice that the lead that goes between each piece is sort of obscuring a little bit of the details of the face, but because this medium is not very conducive to lots of detail. It's difficult often to read these stories, but you can tell that even within this limitation that this horse you're seeing from the back. There's the back end of a horse, and in order for you to see the back end of the horse has to be positioned in space toward you, where it's the horse is foreshortened in order for this to happen, and it's not in line or it's not on the same plane as these horses, so that there is a spatial relationship implied going on here, even within a system that it's hardly even capable of making anything. Any kind of representation of three-dimensional form, we still have a little bit of indication of it here. So this would be a kind of a progressive thing. As later, medieval art will move into in the north here. We'll move into where they become very, very good at representing the illusion of spatial things, and so this is a tiny little baby step in that direction, from the direction of the normal stained glass window style. Okay, let's look at the manuscript illumination in Paris. This is a book called The Moralizing Bible, and it's made as one of a lot of books that were made at this time by like professionals. That is, instead of being just made by monks in scriptoria, where they're just copying books because they're sort of saving civilization from the barbarians on the outside. This is a business. There's a growing population within Paris and in all the university towns in Europe, like Oxford and Padua and several others around Europe, that were just giant university towns, and they were filled with students who need books. And so there's scriptoria are businesses to spring up to fulfill this demand. This one is being a moralizing Bible. Let me show you. This is other pages of the same book look like this. All these pages look like there's 8 circles, and it has commentaries. The commentaries are they're stories from the Bible, and then commentaries related to it, like sermons, things that are related to the stories in the Bible. So you can see the whole book is just a bunch of pictures, and they're all in a circular format that looks very much like stained glass. It's the same sort of format that stained glass is made in. Just like the whole fairness things we were just seeing. There's a lot of compositions within stained glass windows are like this, with just a bunch of circles. And so this is another example of architecture influencing the other arts, the manuscript illumination. We saw that again, we saw that before in the Romanesque with that Matthew in a architectural niche. But on this front-facing page of this moralizing Bible, we have an image that is divided as if it were an architectural thing, with columns and I guess this is some sort of a trefoil arch around the figures. This is the regent, the mother of the king, and here's the young king, Louis IX, sitting on their thrones in an upper story of a building, and there's lots of architecture up here to show, I guess, that it's building stuff. It's just more pattern and things that you imagine. Let's see. If I look over here, it's like this, like putting little bits of stage scenery to indicate that, okay, we're in a building over here, like this. Except in this case, it's just little buildings that are just filling the space up here. And down here, you have the same sort of thing repeated, but in this case, you have a figure sitting, facing right. It seems to be a monk wearing, with the hair, the hair cut like this, a tonsure, I think it's called. And the actual artist who's making the book. You can see that he's working on the actual book that we're looking at in the next pages. These 4 circles here that you see are like the ones in the book itself. So we see in the front image of the book being made, and this is what the difference in status of the two. This one is pointing and telling him what to do, and this one is doing it. The figures. Let's see. The figures are some distortion in it. Look at this little shape here with the knee. That's kind of disturbing looking. It's weird. You can see that there's a thigh under here, but here this is a little weird. We saw that before in the manuscript illumination for representing Christ and the washing of the feet. But the worker, you can tell he's individualized. He looks like a real, as an actual person. It wouldn't surprise me if the person who made this probably looks like this, or has a friend that looks like that. He's shown. They want to show you stuff. Want to show you the details of the tools and everything, how the thing is made. His desk, though within the realm of this kind of drawing style, objects that are three-dimensional and kind of architectural or rendered as flat shapes. If we go back over here, whatever this is some sort of seat. I don't know. It's just filled with some elements that at one point in the past may have given some sort of illusion of a seat, but now these pieces are just randomly stuck so as to give you an impression of something over here that he's sitting on, and a lectern of some sort that he's got his book on. But otherwise, it's a figural type, and it's got much more detail in terms of the rendering of the cloth with the different formations of lines and tones, so as to make you can see the roundness of each one of the bits of cloth as it moves around its folds. But the folds are not convincing in any sort of way, and the artist doesn't seem to understand anything about the anatomy, at least underneath. But it's more about the decoration and the prettiness of the thing. It's got a background made of gold underneath everything. And in that background, it wasn't enough simply for it to be gold. They would add little tooling within the gold, little bits of where they take a sharp stylus and sort of draw into the surface to create all these little spirals. On this one, I can't see what's on that one, but there's some checker patterns on this one, and there's something else going on over here, so that they want every single square inch of this thing to be filled with either bright colors or with patterns of some kind. The way these figures are rendered remind me a lot of that figure, this kind of figure, this sort of elegant, noble figure that's otherworldly, and it is delicate. Going back, in that the gestures, the thing, it's like the nobility, and the nobility is represented as a kind of a different kind of figure. It's still doll-like, but it's a special doll. It has notice that they're very similar to one another, and they look royal. They look pretty, and they look delicate. Little tiny little feet sticking out here. These gestures are all to make them look like they're special, whereas these have a greater degree of realism to them. You can tell the kind of figure and the gesture, the body language, and these as coming from deriving originally from observation of real people, whereas these are more like conceptual people. Here's another page from it with Christ as the creator, with using a compass, and this is the universe that he's creating down here. With that hand, with the drawing of that hand, with the delicate fingers and that line that describes the form. A little bit of modeling inside. That's some bit of drawing there, and it doesn't look. I guess they had a bigger picture, and they were able to put more attention to this than they were to this, this kind of drawing, or this kind of, which is, comparatively more cartoony. And looking at these hands. All right, let's look at another work. This is going to England now, in the Gothic in England. This is called the Windmill Psalter. The Psalter is a book of Psalms, and what we're looking at here on the page on the left is a big letter B. This is the first letter of the word for blessed. In Latin, I think it's going to be beatus or something along those lines. You got to have a B and then an E over here, and the rest of the word is down in here. It's kind of not legible, but blessed is the man. There's the word man, vir, kve is that, and non, I think there's a non in there somewhere. That does not. This is concilio, does not consult with the impious or the sinful. So that's the sentence being said at the beginning, the great big B, then the E, and then the rest of a sentence. But the way the B is decorated sort of harks back to the way Iberno-Saxon did with the initial letters, putting a very complex, filled in with stuff letter like the Book of Kells. It's not the same style, but this is sort of the same concept of making a great big letter. In this case, this is the stuff that the letter is filled with is a whole bunch of figures with interlace of vines going on everywhere, and the figures all are it's a family tree of Jesus. So we have Jesse here with a tree trunk coming out of him, or at least a vine, a grapevine coming out of him, and it's divided into all sorts of tendrils that go around and create little vignettes so as to have figures in them. This is David, would be the son of Jesse, and then you have others figures. I think they're probably identified on these scrolls. All the different ones that go between Jesse and Christ, which would be here. It's a little abbreviated line down the middle, and then Christ as an adult here. With all these other figures, and they're all the little doll-like precious figures with interesting drapery and things for everyone, and the intricate interlace that goes in different colors of vines that swirl around and go do the under and over thing everywhere. The emphasis on grapes and the grape leaves and grapes, a reference to the Eucharist. Little figures around here. This is I think one of the gospel writers over here. Gospel writers over here in the corners, and filling up every little piece that you can with decoration and pattern. On this side, similar to the Hiberno-Saxon tradition of having a bunch of text and having the letters and the decoration of letters just sort of blend into the text. You have another scene going on. This is Solomon, in the Judgment of Solomon, with the two women who are claiming as a baby, one baby, and they Solomon decides to solve the problem by telling the soldier to cut the baby in half, and that reveals the actual mother here raises her hand to object to the cutting of the baby in half. But notice that the figures are playful. It's a serious story, but the figures are kind of playful, and they're just like little paper dolls that someone is playing at the story, and the paper dolls are relating to the bits of surface that the letter is providing. Like Solomon is sitting on a chair that's sitting on the crossbar of an E, and this lady here, this lady is standing on this part of the letter. This one is standing on this part of the letter over here. And the soldier is sort of floating in space, so he sort of hooks his foot under here. So there's a little bit of a logic going on to that, when otherwise everything is just sort of floating in a sea of decoration. There's a windmill in it that is unexplained, and it is such an odd thing to have that it's the name of the psalter, called the windmill psalter. And it may have some sort of reference to a biblical verse that has where the word wind is in it, so there might be some reason for it. But otherwise, it's just one of the decorations among all the other decorations, and the artist has tried to fill up the page with leaves and little tendrils of vines sticking out every direction. Just to, this is weird, idiosyncratic manner. And then even when you get into the text and there's an opportunity for a line ending here and then a new one beginning here, leaving this little space. So they put a box and fill it with a serpent or a composite animal that has a serpent body with wings and little cow-like hooved legs and a head at the tail and a human head at the front. So this is just a bit of decoration, just like all of the rest, and it may have some reference to the evil that is in this word, and this is evil right here, and maybe that is something to do with that. And then you have a peacock down here. So the artist has just filled this thing with all the pattern and stuff. So the same sorts of things that we saw going on in France of decoration and pattern and little doll-like figures is continuing on in England. And we also have something else different in England. Matthew Paris. He's an artist in this book. He was an artist. He was a writer and an artist, and he would write a book and illustrate it himself. He was a monk, and there's a self-portrait of him here as part of a picture of the Madonna Child enthroned, and it's a wonderful drawing, and it sort of shows the personality of this monk. Let's first look at him. He's drawn himself as a monk on his knees praying before Jesus and his mother. And he looks very humble in this pose. And he's humbly sort of holding his hands as if he's holding these words. These are a description. There's words that he's offering up with his gesture to Mary up there. But he's written his name here. This is the M for Matthew. There's Matthias Peritianus, I think is what it says. And brother is this word here. But he's made it in all capital letters, as fancy as he can make them, and with alternating red and blue colors. And this doesn't look very, very, very humble. And it looks like he's shouting his name, unlike the pose that he's making down here. But let's look at the style that he's using to draw with. We've seen images like this of the manuscript illumination things, but this is something different to it. The way the drawing, this isn't finished. It looks like it's almost like it doesn't have the gold, it doesn't have the thick paint of colors. It's just a drawing with a kind of a wash to indicate a little bit of light and dark, or a little bit of color. But the drawing itself is what's telling you the forms. Look at the outline here. When you have a quill pen and it has a little slit in the end of it, so when you dip it in the ink and you start drawing with it, the pressure that you apply will affect the width of the line. So he's using that width of the line to help describe the forms. These little shapes that you see and all these little lines are little indicators of the form of this cloth as it moves around. And he's very good at it. He has a thinner lines to indicate the details inside, but the external line, it has a very strong descriptive power of form. And that's an interesting way of drawing. And when I say he's good at it, he's, you can read what the form is without being told with light and dark tones. And that's an interesting thing. And what he does, in addition to this sort of thing, is that he makes drawings that are, like your example, here's a drawing of an elephant by the same guy. He apparently there was an elephant at the Tower of London, and he had an opportunity to draw it. And this is an example of an artist looking at a real object and drawing it, and something that he would not have had any images in his mind as to what one looks like. Everybody knows what elephants look like from countless images, but if you've never seen one and then you suddenly have to draw one, this is the result. When he draws the figure, it's a figural type. It's something that goes along with all the kinds of figures. That it looks perfectly consistent with all the figural types that you see in the medieval art. But the elephant is a new thing. Here's an example of one of his books. This is the history of Edward the King, and it is filled with his own writing here, telling the story, and also pictures that he drew illustrating the story. And you can see the type of figure, the little doll-like figures, and the patterns and everything, things that we're coming to expect. It's a simpler version. Only some of the pieces, some of the shapes are colored with inks, and others are left with just the parchment color underneath. He also did a map of England. And I don't know how you make a map when you don't have one to look at, and you've never seen images from the space station looking down to see what England looks like. But he managed to make this map, and it's a pretty convincing image of England. This is Scotia up here above the sea. This is Scotland and the Wall of Hadrian. There's London right here on the Thames River as it empties out over here, which is not exactly the right place. It should be emptying over here. Windsor Castle, and I'm sure that all these are regular. I mean, these are identifiable places in England. Norfolk and Southfolk here, so that he I don't know where he got the information to do this. It's one of the earliest maps of England that there is, but it's you can see he was into a lot of things, and he was very skillful at what he did. So it's interesting to have an artist that we know his name, and that he did other things besides just you know, these sorts of things or these sorts of things. Okay, that's enough for this one.